In a sense, if all conflict stopped, reality would freeze. Even motion would stop. Because you see, even molecules of gas in a jar, let's say we just have some oxygen in a jar. You might say, well, where's the conflict there? But even in that jar, if the temperature is anything above absolute zero, the molecules are bouncing around. That's what temperature is. It's a measure of the bouncing and velocities of all the average of the molecules. They're bouncing around. They're colliding and hitting into each other. When they collide, they generate a little bit of heat, and they lose a little bit of their energy as they collide, right? They're colliding. Heat is dissipating because they're bouncing into each other. They're losing momentum, and there's friction going on between these different little molecules. Eventually, if that jar was sitting there long enough, it would go to absolute zero. All the heat would be lost, and all the motion of the molecules would settle down into a total freeze. This is the heat death of the universe. And if that happened, eventually it would all just become one single thing, right? Not only would the whole universe freeze, but it would literally fuse into one singularity. And that would be ultimate peace. That would be consciousness in its undifferentiated state. That would be pure formlessness, pure emptiness. That would be the Godhead. That would be infinity. That would be God's mind in total repose, total rest. This is, imagine what the universe was like before the Big Bang. That's what that would be. So even though you might say you want peace, do you really want peace? Because that's real peace. You call that peace death. Scientists call it heat death, the heat death of the universe. It's hard to love that because you're attached to existing within the formed world, the formed universe. You don't want a formless universe. You call that death. You're afraid of that. So there's a paradox of unity. The paradox of unity is this: absolute unity must include division within itself. It can't exclude division, because if it excluded anything, it wouldn't be unity. It wouldn't be absolute unity. So actually, the same also applies to infinity. Absolute infinity must include all finite things. And so therefore, unity leads to division, and division leads to unity. You see, it's a cycle. It goes in both directions. And as I talked about in my episode about division versus unity, what you see all across nature and all across human culture and society is that things become unified. No, let me rephrase it. Things differentiate themselves, starting from a unity, things differentiate themselves, and then as they differentiate, the differentiations and divisions proliferate, and then it reaches a certain point, like a pendulum, it swings back and forth. Eventually, once there's enough division, the division starts to collapse and reunify. And then as they reunify, they redivide again in a fractal fashion. And this keeps happening fractally to an infinite degree. Have you noticed this? This is fucking profound. This is the very heart of the design of reality. Division creates an impulse towards unity, and unity creates an impulse towards division. But this unification process is a struggle. To go from division to unity is not all rainbows and butterflies. People usually think of unity as some beautiful, positive, peaceful thing, but it isn't so simple in practice. And the reason that is because you yourself are not united yet. See, you're divided. You're divided from the world. You're divided from your family. You're divided from other humans. You're divided from other races, from other species, from animals. You're divided from inanimate objects. So you have all these divisions in your own mind about what you are. You're even divided about your own psychology. You're divided about what you want in the world. Do you want to be fit or do you want to eat junk food? You're divided even about that. Do you want sex with this person or do you want sex with that person? You're divided about that. See? So because your mind is so divided, that distorts your perception of what unity is and your ability to love unity. You actually can't love unity when your mind is divided. Unity terrifies you because you're attached to certain divisions. You've identified yourself with certain divisions. And absolute unity would erase those divisions. You call that death. So in practice, when unity is occurring within reality, this can look very ugly. See, ultimately, when you really zoom out and you look at what is the universe doing, it used to be a total unity, then it exploded into a big bang of division. It divided into all these different molecules and atoms, right? Or rather into just like quarks, let's say. Then those turned into atoms. Then those atoms started unifying into molecules. Then those molecules started unifying further into proteins. Then those proteins into cells, into DNA, and then those into organisms, and then those organisms into like one single cellular organisms, then those single cellular organisms into multicellular organisms, then those multicellular organisms into more complex organisms and mammals. Then those mammals, they started dividing themselves into males and females, and they started to recombine together to create more offspring and so on like this. And then we got humans, and then humans started to, there was an original race of humans, maybe like in Africa or someplace. And then from there, they started to spread and proliferate and divide into sub-races. Then you got the Asians, then you got the people in the North, people in the South, then you got whites, and you got blacks, and you got Native Americans and all this, right? So there's a lot of division. Now it's reunifying again. All the different races are interbreeding. We have more mixed race children every single year. And maybe in 1,000 years, we won't even have races because all the races will interbreed so much. See how this works? But that process is not all peaceful. It's not all beautiful and positive from your point of view. There are a lot of people in the world who are opposed to interracial marriages. There are a lot of racist people in the world still who believe that their race is the best, or their culture or their nation is the best. See, even cultures right now, as the world is globalizing, our cultures are starting to unify and merge together as well. There's less distinct cultures. And some people bemoan that as the death of some culture. We also have the death of languages. Languages are unifying, right? There was a point in human history where most of the languages couldn't be translated into each other, and there was like thousands of languages. Now, every year, languages are dying off and going extinct. Some people bemoan this fact. The people who study language are horrified by this. A lot of beautiful languages are going extinct, but at the same time, it's all unifying into one language. Eventually, we'll probably have one universal language, whether that's English or something, or Chinese or whatever. See, we don't know which language is going to win out that battle. We don't know. Now, if you speak English, you want it to be English because that makes life easier for you. You don't have to learn Chinese. If you're Chinese, you want it to be Chinese because you don't want to learn English. So how's that conflict going to get resolved? There's going to be a culture war there. See, people are going to cling, and there's going to be pain involved with that. But it's a unification process, you see? Take a look at how geopolitics works and how wars and empires works. For example, from Putin's point of view, he's trying to unify Russia. But look at how ugly that looks when you turn on the news. How do you think the Ukrainians feel about the unification of Russia when Putin doesn't even acknowledge the difference between Ukraine and Russia? See, in a Ukrainian person's mind, there's a division between Russia and Ukraine. And in Putin's mind, there isn't. Now, the question is, who's right? The problem is that the Ukrainians are so biased that they think they're right, and Putin is so biased that he thinks he's right. And then everybody watching is taking sides, and they think that their side, whatever side they're taking, that they're right. Now, of course, it's all relative. Go check out my episode called Understanding Relativism for more on that. Which is not to say that I'm sort of making a false equivalence here. And I'm not trying to say that the Ukrainian position is the same as the Russian position. I'm not trying to whitewash what Putin is doing. He's committing atrocities, and that's obvious. But we're just taking a very zoomed out perspective, right? This is like, I'm trying to explain to you the perspective of God. You know, how does God view the Ukraine-Russia situation? This is how God views it. This is not how normal humans look at things. Look at China. China is trying to unify Taiwan and Hong Kong with China. Now, from China's point of view, that's correct because they don't recognize the difference between China, Taiwan, Hong Kong. But Westerners have created these differences and have fought wars over these differences, and they want to maintain these differences. Again, who's right? Is there going to be a war over that? Well, if everybody thinks that they're right, yeah, there's going to be a war there. There's going to be conflict there. If not a war, at least conflict. There's already conflict in that situation because both sides think they're right and they don't want to realize the relativity of that situation.